Hey guys, Priscilla here. Welcome back to Release the Craftin' and welcome back to Storycraft. I have another one for you today in the spirits of this season, and today we're going to be talking about the Mari Lwyd, which is not the Mari Lwyd, as I've been saying it this entire time. I have been corrected. It is the Mari Lwyd, and this is a tradition from Welsh, like Wales, not Welsh. It's not from Welsh. It's from Wales. It's a Welsh tradition. I know how words work. They're really hard though, trademarked. But the Mari Lwyd is a wassailing tradition that comes to us from the south of Wales, and it's actually very old. So old that there's a lot of scholars, and they're all talking about it, but they don't actually know where it comes from, and so there's a lot of debate, and we'll get into that as the story goes on. It's not particularly a spirit like the rest of the spirits of the season have been, but I wanted to talk about this one because it creeps me out. And that's the entire reason we're talking about it. And I'm going to describe to you what it is, and you're going to know immediately, if you've been following this channel for any length of time, why it creeps me out. So here we go. It creeps me out because the Mari Lwyd is basically a hobby horse. And if you aren't familiar with that, a hobby horse is a fake toy horse. The most recent version of which would be that little horse that you got to ride on. It was a head of a horse on a stick, and you would ride it around your house like it was a real horse. That's a hobby horse. This is though a giant pole that would go because it's as tall as a man, a little bit taller sometimes. And at the top of that, they would put a horse's skull, and then they would give it some pretty ribbons and maybe some flowers, like a little flower crown. And then they would hang a white sheet off of it so that the person holding the horse, the horse head up, could hide underneath the sheet. And that to me is terrifying. I have a weird phobia of horses, so this tradition does not sit well with me. I find it very spooky, so that's why we're talking about it. So if you aren't familiar, wassailing is essentially going around at Christmas time, traditionally, Yule time, and going door to door, singing songs in exchange for food and an alcoholic beverage or two. And occasionally you would carry your own wassail, which is a mix of wines and spices, alcohols, all sorts of things, depending on what you have available in your area. And you would offer up your version, and then you would share the house's version amongst yourselves in exchange for songs. It's sort of the precursor to caroling. So caroling is sort of supplanted wassailing, but there's a big revival to bring wassailing back. And I love that because it's entirely alcohol driven. But the Mari Lwyd is a version of wassailing where you would go door to door with this hobby horse and a group of men. There'd usually be one person to sort of corral everybody and keep everybody under control. And then a couple other guys to do shenanigans around your house. Occasionally they would be dressed like Punch and Judy, which are a really old theater style puppet thing. I'm not explaining that today. So I feel like I failed you once again, but you can also look up that if you are not familiar with Punch and Judy. But some of the guys might dress up as Punch and Judy, do some shenanigans while everything else is happening. And most of the other people were just sort of hangers-on who were there to have a good time, make jokes, do sorts of things like that. And what they would do is they would go to your house, and they would, in song, the Mari Lwyd would sing to you, hey, can I come into your house? And then you would have to sing back, no, actually, you can't. And this would go back and forth in sort of a sing-off contest where you'd have to come up with different excuses as to why the Mari Lwyd could not come into your house. And the Mari Lwyd would be please let me in your house, but in various ways. And eventually it would go on and on and on until the people whose house it was gave up or ran out of responses. And then you would let them in and then share your wine and your foods with the people who were in the party with the Mari Lwyd. And that's sort of the tradition. Sometimes they would sing. Other times they might get into a verbal rhyming competition. So it might be a rhyme off as opposed to a sing off. Sometimes there would be an exchange of riddles. It'd all be sort of good-natured, body fun that these guys would do. And they would just go around. And this happened all over the place. And this type of tradition of a hobby horse going to your house and harassing you basically for entry is not new. It would happen not just in Wales, but also in England, with various animal heads being involved. So sometimes it would be a goat's head, sometimes it would be a bull's head. It wouldn't always be the actual skull of the animal. That also includes the Mari Lwyd version. Sometimes they would make one out of like paper or ceramics or something else other than like bone if they didn't have access to a horse's head or didn't want to use a horse's head for their puppet head. But speaking of the word puppet, sometimes it would just be the skull glued to the top of this like stick, and sometimes they would rig it up so that the jaw would actually move like it was actually talking to you, which is fun but also terrifying for me. Everybody else enjoyed it. In addition to getting into a battle of song at your door, the Mari Lwyd might also chase your children around and terrify them, for funsies. And I can imagine that at that time, there were a lot more children who had fears of horses, and it wasn't irrational then, like it is now. So traditionally, the Mari Lwyd would show up at your house either at Christmas or around New Year's time. It sort of varies from place to place regionally, or basically on whenever these guys decided, but that would be like the week-long window of when they would pop up at your house and do this little game. Sometimes they would make it sort of a tradition where they would take the horse's head and bury it until the next year and then sort of resurrect, metaphorically, the head to then place it back onto the hobby horse to start the next year's tradition, which is very interesting to me, more in relation to the origin that I'm about to go into of the Mari Lwyd, depending on which school of thought you are in as to where it comes from. So there's also some debate on whether or not this was done instead of like wassailing or if it was done together with the wassailing, I don't know how you say it. It seems to be sort of indistinguishable from the practice, so they might have all happened together. There might have been some good-natured music happening in addition to this battle of song. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of debate on like what the actual tradition are, if they were done separately or together. It just seems to be a lot of overlap in regards to the Mari Lwyd and wassailing, like the act of wassailing itself. But interestingly, Mari Lwyd is a name that has a lot of debate because they can't decide where the name comes from because there's not a lot of documentation on this thing, like this traditional practice in particular, even though it's been around for a very long time, because the first time that they actually wrote it down or like recorded any information about the Mari Lwyd was in the 1800s. But it's recognized that this tradition is way older than that, like way, way older, like before they were writing stuff down, kind of older. They've been doing this tradition for a very long time. But unfortunately, as is sort of problematic with things in this particular area, they didn't write a lot of stuff down. So they didn't write it down until the 1800s. So there's a lot of debate on where this came from, where the name comes from. So there is an argument to be made that Mari Lwyd can be a translation of the Blessed Mary in relation to the Virgin Mary. So like in relation to Catholicism in general, because the Catholics sort of Christianized the area of Britain and Wales. So there's a lot of like thought to support this sort of school of belief. But there's a very strong, very valid argument to make that Mari Lwyd actually comes to us from the word in Welsh. Lwyd actually means gray, and it might just be a derivative version of gray mare because it's a horse's head, which makes the most sense to me. There's also evidence to support that it might be white mare, and that might also have relation to why it's a white cloth that is traditionally wrapped around the person and the stick for the hobby horse itself. That makes very straightforward sense to me. So that's where I tend to lean in like regards to where the name of this comes from. There is also a little bit about it being related to the words merry lewd, which refers to a merry game. So like it's a fun game that we're doing at this time, which is also a very straightforward, very logical answer to me. But I'm not like a historian, so I'm just going to go with what my heart says is right. And I think it just means mare. I think it's a gray or white mare. But, you decide what works best for you. That's how we're dealing with facts today. So in its history, the Mari Lwyd, also has the same debate as to whether it is a Christian tradition meant to sort of coincide with like the festivities of the ass, as in the donkey, that helped Mary and Joseph like flee and was at the birth of Christ and all the things. The donkey that they rode around. That this might be like an echo of that, and that's where there's some argument to be made for that. This one to me is strange. I don't really see the connection, but there's a lot of people arguing that this is the source of it. I couldn't find anything that like really solidly connected to it because, like I said, they didn't write anything down about this until the 1800s, so they don't really have that much evidence. A lot of it is speculative. There's other folklorists who believe that this is actually a pre-Christian tradition, and it may have also been like a really old religious rite that over time became drained of religious context and just sort of became a game that was played instead of an actual religious performance, which rings more true to me because it makes the most sense in my brain. But I'm also a witchy person, so I would be inclined to believe the witchiest of things. Wikipedia did note that there is a folklorist that believes that the Lwyd is actually like a death horse, and the white cloth is symbolizing death, and it was supposed to be like a really dark thing that came around Samhain time, and then sort of evolved into this. But that seems extra edgelordy to me. But also there's no evidence to support that thought train either. That's just somebody else's wild speculation on where this tradition could possibly come from. But the Lwyd, like I said, is part of this huge hooded animal hobby horse tradition that lasted for a really long time. With the goat's head, the Christmas bull, all those things. So there's a lot to be said that this practice may have been pre-Christian, but maybe not super religious pre-Christian, just sort of a practice that was traditionally carried out around this time of year. Which also rings very true to me because it has such a widespread across Wales and like Great Britain. And in those other places, it didn't only take place at Christmas. It could also happen during May Day or Beltane, which is also interesting. It may also have arose in connection to the habits of like the wealthy people in the 16th to 17th century of having hobby horses. So it was like a big trendy thing for them to have hobby horses, and this may just be a derivative offshoot of that. There's not really like a strong origin point for this, which is a little bit frustrating when you're looking into it, because you kind of want to be like, oh yeah, it comes from here and it goes this way, and that's totally logical. But like I said, unfortunately they didn't write anything down about it, but it still is a really fun like holiday tradition. I think if it wasn't a horse, I would be all the way down to recreate this and have like a singing rhyme off game of wits every year. It's kind of really fun, but it's terrifying to me. Spookier if you're a child and being chased by a horse skull on a pole. But it's a thing. And it's the Lwyd, and I hope that you guys enjoyed my little version of the story. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Until then, happy crafting. Bye!